So let's talk about the part in the law that talks about the unfair trading practices. And I know that, the minister hasn't issued a finite list, but what Hi guys, welcome to Mamulawo. Today we are going to discuss labor law matters, especially relating to SMMEs. Some of you have made asked the question around whether or not, or when I'm speaking about labor law regarding SMMEs. Previously in previous videos, we've talked about the rights of employees. Today we're going to talk about the rights of employers. Yes, we are. So we've invited a guest by the name of Khomotso Mufamadi. Khomotso is a well-versed attorney in the labor law space, and I will tell you more about her later on. Welcome, Khomotso.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you because I really am passionate about small and medium enterprises in the country, because the statistics say that we've got, a large percentage of employees being employed by this particular sector. And I thought it was really, really important that we discuss the dynamics between the two parties, employers and employees in this sector, so that we can try to come to a situation where the parties work, together. There is that cohesion between the two parties, because when there's cohesion between the two parties in the labor law space, then the employers become consistent in terms of making business and making money, and the employees remain employed. But where there's no cohesion and there's disputes and fights and misunderstandings, then the opposite occurs. People lose jobs, companies close, and we are right back at a struggling economy. So that is why Mamulama wanted to bring this subject matter to the fore. And on that note, I want us to talk about, so recently in 2024, there was a piece of legislation that was promulgated called the National Small Enterprise Amendment Act. And this act really applies to particularly the small SMMEs, small and medium SMMEs. And it says that there is an ombud service that is going to be put in place. What is the office of the ombud doing? What do they do? What is an ombud, and how do SMMEs benefit from an ombud?
Thanks for this question. I think what's really, really important about the Ombudsman in this context, what it is designed to do is to protect small and medium enterprises in relation to how they do business. Of course, if you have any small business, if you've ever run a small business, you'll know you'll have a million disputes.
Right.
Clients not paying invoices, all kinds of issues that you might have that fall into the legal space. But then how do you begin to enforce your rights? Particularly from a cost perspective, this is very, very difficult for small to medium enterprises. So the Ombudsman aims to create a space where SMMEs can go and deal with their disputes in a way that is cost effective for them.
Okay.
So I think what is really cool for me, as soon as I read about the Ombudsman, I started thinking about the gig economy. And there's been this tussle over the years as to whether gig workers are employees or independent contractors.
Yeah.
And I thought, how interesting would it be if they started registering as micro enterprises?
That would be amazing. I hope somebody's listening.
Yeah, listen, guys, listen to what I'm saying.
This is important.
So I mean, and in that respect, they could address their issues, they could address their concerns with an ombudsman, as opposed to having to try and fight at the CCMA that they are employees, right, when the law hasn't yet recognized them as employees.
And they really are participating in the economy quite actively, so as the gig economy, right?
In a big way.
Wow. So let's talk about the part in the law that talks about the unfair trading practices. And I know that, the minister hasn't issued a finite list, but what would the minister see as trading practices that are unfair for SMMEs in order for them to be better protected? What are some of those practices just in general?
So you're quite right that they haven't yet promulgated a list, but what we have in the Act is a guideline, how the minister may make the decision or the determination that something is an unfair trading practice. And the list is a bit long, but in essence, it's things like anti-competitive behavior, behavior which deceives the SMME. I think this is really important, and these kinds of things are actionable against clients and government, larger enterprises who are often, unfortunately, the culprits when it comes to deceiving small to medium enterprises.
Yeah.
So the idea is to focus on unfair trading practices that might hinder the SMME from doing business or continuing business because of the unfair practices of other entities.
Yeah. And I think that's really, really important, that we don't bring down an economy just because there are basics that could be put in place in order to make sure that, the small, medium enterprise have a fighting chance, essentially, to scale as businesses. So I want to talk about the economic pressures, right, of SMMEs. And I think they do face a lot of economic pressures. And the statistics say that approximately 60% of South African workforce is employed by small and medium businesses, right? And then 26% of the SMEs are forced to shut down their businesses, and of which 7% are closed permanently. And that is a really sad state of affairs. So what role do employees need to play in empowering the SMEs to stay open? Because like we've said, they employ 60% of South Africans.
I think we have such a difficult situation in the country. So often people aren't choosing their vocation.
True.
People are falling into their vocations. People are saying, jobby job. I need to work. I need to put food on the table.
Right.
Whether I hate this thing every day, whether I want to escape every day is beyond, it's not part of the determination for me to make a decision about what I do to make a livelihood or to make an income, right?
Right.
So often you've got employees in businesses who are not great fits, who don't really want to be there, who have those challenges.
Yeah.
But our law also says that an employee has certain obligations towards an employer.
Yeah.
They have a duty of good faith. They have a duty to meet their employment contracts. They have those duties that an employer ought to enforce if there's a need. But what I think is much better to do for an employer long before you get to enforcement, long before you start talking this legal language, is to engage your employees, to talk with your employees, to find out, if you're not best placed in this area of the business, what do you think you can do? What have you noticed in the business that could be interesting for you? And it's on employees to also do that introspection, to say, where could I be best placed? So that I'm able to perform functions for my employer that are useful to them and that I enjoy. So at times, what I think is better for the employment relationship is for people to be introspective. For people to be honest with themselves and say, where should I fit? Where do I belong in this space? And how can I best serve this space?
What are my strengths as an employee? What are my weaknesses as an employee? What do I like to do? So that collaboration, I think, is also quite important, right? Let's not just have a braai on Friday afternoons. Let's talk about these casually around what sort of what sort of benefit can I bring to the business in order to keep it open, in order to keep it going, so that I can also remain employed and sustain myself in my personal life. I think that's really, really important, that collaboration that employers and employees need to have. So tell us, the employers need to ensure longevity in their business, as I've already said, by employing or retaining the right type of employee. What does the right type of employee look like? So as employers wouldn't necessarily, especially in small businesses, they just want the person who can do the job. But I think it is important at this point in time, in order to avoid churn, where people are leaving in lots of numbers, or people are leaving more often than not. That leaves a gap in the employer's business. What does employing the right type of employee look like to ensure that longevity?
I think what I've noticed in a lot of spaces is when you talk about employee misfit, right? So when you're looking to hire someone, you think, okay, I need this type of person. This is the title. You haven't really formulated the job description in an honest way.
Yeah.
So maybe you've listed, you've listed a bunch of things that you want this employee to be able to do. You've listed a bunch of things that they, skills that they're supposed to come with. But you haven't been honest about the content of the job, honestly, as an employer, right? So the first thing is, I think, for employers to spend a good amount of time really thinking about that JD.
That scope.
Really thinking about that scope. What does that person really do every day? So that when an employee comes into the space, they have a realistic expectation and understanding.
Correct.
What is my job every day? Who am I every day? What do these people expect of me? How do I fulfill those expectations?
Right.
I think there's a lot of mismatch in employment spaces about that. You get into a job, 2-3 months in, you think, This is not what I applied
I'm not
for.
sure this is what I signed up for.
This is not what I applied for.
Yeah.
This is not the thing that I want to
Yeah.
do. I didn't know it was going to be like this.
And there's a disconnect.
There's a complete disconnect. And what does disconnect lead to? Frustration. Frustration, disappointment, sometimes even, you're going on to things like depression, anxiety, all kinds of mental health challenges that come from dissatisfaction of work.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things that often lead to high attrition. Employers beginning the journey of looking for an employee from a position of not being quite truthful about what is actually expected of this employee until they're there.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Things like remuneration are part of it.
True.
Things like work-life balance is huge right now. It's huge. COVID gave us a little slice of life, right?
It did.
So as much as it was difficult,
Yeah.
from a work perspective, it gave us a little bit of a glimpse into what it could look like if you work from home every day.
Absolutely.
If you were able to, wake up and go to the gym or drop your kids off at school, pick them up from school, not work until 8 p.m. at night. It gave us something to say, life can actually look different. So now people want that different.
Ah, yes.
Now people really want that different. They really crave that balance. They really crave for their employers to actually be reflective about their whole lives and not only about their work life.
Because they are not just employees, they are people.
They're
They
people.
are mums, they are uncles,
They're
they're
people.
daughters. They are people, right?
And I often say to people, if you don't give your employees time to spend with their families to raise their kids, that same kid that you're not giving the parent time to actually raise, that's the kid who's going to hijack you in 20 years. And I mean, it's difficult, but we all have a part to play in building families and building communities and building societies and building our nation. We all have a part to
That
play.
is giving me goosebumps because that is an example I give to people all the time. That if we don't do right by this person who supports this person, then that breakage actually then has a bigger impact on the community.
100%.
Right?
100%.
That's so important. It gives me goosebumps just talking about it. So tell us, in terms of keeping a small and medium business operational, it requires a certain level of professionalism from employees. I mean, let's be serious. Employees and employers need to have a certain level of professionalism, right? You can't just do as you please in the workplace. What are the top 5 mechanisms that SMEs can put in place to manage employees properly, right?
So before I get to what employers can do, a message to employees: it's time to grow up, guys. You're a grown up now. You're a grown up now. This is a professional space. You can't do the things that you always thought you would do. Sometimes work looks a little bit different to what you expected, but it's time to put your big girl panties on and move.
Correct.
Okay,
And
that's
be
big.
professional.
And be a professional. You are now in a professional environment. You're no longer a child.
Right.
So it's time for all of us to sort of stand up and grow up a little bit, right?
Correct.
So from an employer perspective, unfortunately, so much of this comes down to policy, which is not great. But I think before policy comes a lot of training.
Yeah.
Comes your workshops, comes your conversations, your honest check-ins. Those sorts of things sort of bring your employees closer to you and create space for them to communicate with you when they are not happy, right? Those are the perfect preventative measures that I would say an employer needs to focus on before we think about policy.
Okay.
Now, from a policy perspective, you've got to have solid performance management systems, for example, and fair, right? You cannot manage one person's performance differently from another person's performance. You have to have fair disciplinary policies. And all of those things, to me, start with a conversation.
Yeah.
With good, open conversations in the workplace between employer and employee. So as much as these conversations are central, they are then buttressed by these policy frameworks that you must create.
Okay. So as an employer, I think what you're saying then briefly is that it's really important for you to be able to communicate the vision of the company properly, right? You cannot be sitting there on the chair high up there and then your employees are kind of fiddling around not knowing what they're supposed to do or what they're coming to do every single day. There's a time to be happy and playful, and then there's a time to be serious and grind down to the work, so that there's the two entities of employer and employee can actually just work towards one goal. But everybody needs to be on the same boat in order to be able to move in the same direction.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, really important.
And I was just going to say, especially as an SMME, you have opportunity to be, at the grassroots with your employees. You're not sitting in an office in another city. You're in the office probably every single day.
Yeah.
You are not far removed from your employees. So you have an opportunity to connect with them on that one-on-one level. It may be time consuming, but it will save you time in the long run and money in the long run.
Definitely. That's really important. And so the statistics say that approximately 1,500 businesses were liquidated last year. And that's big, right? Because that's a lot of families that are being impacted by this. What are the main reasons that businesses find themselves being liquidated? And what role can employees play in trying to prevent that, to keep them in a job as well?
The question actually starts before the business starts, right?
Yeah.
Why do we start businesses? So the reality of our unemployment situation is that a lot of people start businesses because of the lack of employment.
Okay.
So there's a lot of survival mode in this space, as much as we would love to say, I took 10 years planning my business, setting it up, creating a business plan, finding investors. For the most part, that's not what's going on in this sector.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are starting businesses out of nowhere. They haven't thought about what kind of business to start in the market where they're operating. They haven't thought about who their clients are or their customers are. They haven't thought about their product. Is there a need for this product? They haven't really thought about how many team members they need and how much they ought to pay them in relation to the employment market.
Correct.
So there's a lot of boxes that are unticked, right?
Yeah.
So that often takes you down a particular road where eventually the business may fail. As an employee, your job is to bring your professionalism and your work ethic to the business space.
True.
So what often happens in smaller enterprises is that you'll find employees taking advantage of the sort of haphazard, my boss doesn't really know what's going on here.
Yeah.
They don't really know what's happening.
Yeah.
The guy he's got another business or he's got family constraints. He's not around. I can do whatever I like here. I'm actually the boss. I think I'm the boss here. So I'm the guy here, not him or her. So you have situations where employees then say, I have more control over this business than my boss even.
Right.
And when you see that shift, when you start to see that power struggle between an employee and an employee, you've got a big problem. You've got a big problem because you don't know who's who in this space.
Correct.
So as an employee, you need to understand what you're doing here. Where do you fit into this food chain? Who are you supposed to be serving? And what do you derive when you provide that service, right?
Yeah.
And have honest conversations about, okay, I'm deriving X. I would like to derive Y. It's about having that openness with your employer to say, actually, I'm not satisfied with where I am and what I'm performing. Maybe you can give me some more responsibility. Now that you know me for a while, you trust me more. I'm able to provide much more to the business than you think. Employees need to be innovative. Employees need to follow rules.
Yeah.
No, people don't want to hear me say that.
Employees need to avoid shrinkage.
Employees need to avoid shrinkage.
You need to avoid shrinkage.
You can't just take what you like.
Correct.
It's not your friend's business.
Yeah.
It's your work. And sometimes when you have that open relationship with your manager or your employer, you tend to take it for granted. You tend to take them light.
Yeah.
But professionalism is so important. Your work ethic, you must perform ultimately.
And also, I think what's also important is I think employees don't realize that when we, as customers, come into the business and we are being serviced by the likes of so-and-so and the boss is away, what you don't realize as so-and-so is that the customer on the other side of the table, of the counter, is a potential employer. They could potentially be employing you. So you also need to display professionalism all the time with the consistency required, because you just never know when your next upgrade is coming from, where the next employer is coming from. They could literally be the guy standing in front of you. You are serving this person and then they say, hey, I have another opportunity. Would you be interested? But if you don't behave accordingly, they're definitely not the person who is going to give you the opportunity that is about to increase or take you to the next level, right? So I think employees need to really look at it from both sides to say, if I'm doing this even when no one's watching, I actually could be opening up opportunities for myself to be able to move to the next level. Yes, it's benefiting my current employer, but it's my job to do this so that I can attract more to go elsewhere to do other things to improve and so forth. So, it's a double-edged sword that I think employees need to look at, to say you're not just the guy sitting there getting a salary. You actually are there presenting yourself as a brand, as a good worker.
Fortunately, we have a lot of young, upcoming, brilliant lawyers with bad attitudes, very arrogant, very unprofessional, dishonest. And I mean, our age group, we were taught about, what did they say? Clients come and go.
Correct.
But your colleagues, the relationships you continue to have with your colleagues are so important.
Regardless of where you're going, your colleagues will remain in that space.
They will remain in that space and they will hire you.
Yeah.
They will hire you. Later on in life, they are the ones who will say, you know what, I've been thinking about that guy. That guy is so focused, hardworking, ethical guy. Let me think about hiring this person. We don't forget. So how you behave in whatever professional space you're in, it leaves a long and lasting memory in the minds of the people that you're interacting with.
That is very important. And then the world is small as well.
Yeah.
So tell me, what are the advantages and disadvantages of working in a family-run business? That gets a bit tricky and sticky at the best of times in family-run businesses. But to be fair, there is an employer and an employee even in a family-run business.
I mean, look, you know your family. so sometimes people, you get somebody who's hired their brother and you're like, but you know your brother.
You knew you were hiring.
Your brother doesn't like to wake up early in the morning.
Yeah.
Your brother is normally late for things. Why do you think that'll be different at work, especially when he works for you?
Because my mom said I should.
I'm sure, but I mean, those are the things that you need to, even if you say, I insist, I must hire my family member. Those are the kinds of things you need to speak openly about. To say, look, I'm hiring you. I'm giving you a chance. I'm giving you an opportunity. I don't want to see this. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see this. This is important to me.
Yeah.
If you do these things, my business will collapse.
Yeah.
We all collapse together.
Yeah.
If my business collapses, we collapse together. We are unemployed together, So, I mean, that's what it honestly comes down to. Yeah. I have family members who I would hire. I have other family members who I wouldn't hire. I know them. They know themselves. But I think it's very important to be clear.
Yeah.
Boundaries, to say, look, you're my brother or you're my sister, but you cannot interact with me as though you're my brother and my sister at work.
Yeah.
We have to interact differently. The other challenge with family-run businesses is whether or not there is fairness between the family members and other employees.
Correct.
So that's what I've seen quite a lot. Like somebody will come in and have a concern about they're not being treated fairly in one respect or another, or the brother of the CEO is sexually harassing them. No one believes them. No one's listening to them. Those kinds of challenges you've got to be mindful of, that, people are capable of being people, and sometimes people are horrible, and the things that they do to each other are wrong. And you need to be prepared to discipline your family member. If you're prepared to hire them, you must be prepared to fire them.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And that's always a sticky point when it comes to family. But I think it is important to mention it so that people become aware around what your business looks like, what you want it to move forward into, and whether or not you want family to come into what your business vision and mission looks like, right? If they can't do what you need them to do, rather stay away, right? So that you can be able to keep that professionalism together. I'm going to move on from the family one because I can imagine that some of our viewers are just going to have a field day about, hiring family members, right? I want to move into the CCMA. So the employer, employed however many people, a handful of people, and now things are going wrong, like we've already explained earlier. And when the things go wrong, the first thing that an employee wants to do is to be heard by an independent third party. In this particular case, it's either the CCMA or it's the bargaining council. What are the top 5 compliance areas that the SMME employer needs to put in place to avoid going to or even losing at the CCMA? Because there's a difference. You can go to the CCMA and still come out, in one piece, but then you can go there and still come out having lost, in a manner of speaking. What do the employers need to do in that space? We've already talked about policies, agreed, but more or less, can you just maybe itemize for us what an employer needs to arm himself with?
I think, going back, policies are really critical
Vital.
in that space.
Vital.
They're really critical.
Yeah.
And again, even things like your training and your workshops are really critical.
Okay.
Because those are the kinds of things that you will be able to use to demonstrate your attempts at preventing misconduct.
Okay.
So if you have sexual harassment training, right?
Yes.
You have sexual harassment training. You then have a sexual harassment policy.
Yeah.
You've created 2 layers.
Yes.
You've created 2 layers to say, I've taught my employees how to follow the rules in this regard extensively. I've spent a lot of time and effort and money to make sure that they understand what are the boundaries here at work. What is my expectation that they must meet, right? And what are the things, the lines that they cannot cross.
Right.
When you are then at the CCMA, that is what you're able to demonstrate to a commissioner.
Okay.
To
You
say,
provide evidence.
To provide evidence to say, I've done everything I could to make sure that my employee understands the rule. Remember when we're dealing with a misconduct question?
Yes.
The question is there a rule?
Yes.
Did the employee know about the rule, or should they have known about the rule?
Yeah.
So you need to make sure you know that they know about the rules.
Yeah.
So that's really the compliance question when you're coming to situations like that. Even in relation to performance, when you're talking about somebody who's later dismissed for poor performance, was there a standard of performance?
Did they know about
Did you create a standard of performance? Did they know about the standard of performance?
Yeah.
Are they aware the expectations that you had? How often did you go through those expectations?
Yeah.
How many times did you sensitize them to the fact that they were not meeting those expectations?
Correct.
What measures did you put into place to assist them to meet those expectations?
Yeah.
So this is the link between policies and disputes.
Yes.
This is the link between policies and disputes. That's why it's so important to have rock solid policies. And I think from a compliance, not even from a compliance perspective, I always say to SMMEs, lawyers are not a waste of your money.
No.
Especially from an advisory perspective.
And we're not talking about this because we are attending.
No. Yeah, of course, a little bit, but no.
It's a need.
But there's a need,
It's a
right?
need.
There's a need. Like, here's the reality of it.
Yeah.
You can spend on lawyers today, or you can spend on lawyers tomorrow.
Correct.
That's where this
gonna
is going.
happen either
It's
way.
going to happen, and it's better to spend or invest that money or that energy. It's not even necessarily lawyers. There's other institutions that do training and things like that.
Yeah.
But spending the time and the effort to actually sensitize your employees to their expectations, create expectations,
Yeah.
make those expectations clear. This is what prevents disputes
Okay.
down the line.
Yeah.
Which tend to be, you're talking about runaway costs at that point. Somebody goes to the CCMA, they're unsuccessful at the CCMA, then they're in the labor court. They're not satisfied at the labor court, they're at the labor appeal court.
Yeah.
Now you're millions out of
Now
pocket.
you're spending a lot of money
It's-
that you could
it's-
have avoided.
Yeah.
Just on the basics.
Just maybe you spend a few thousand rands trying to get a proper policy in place, trying to have things codified, train your employees. You spend way less than trying to litigate one employee who's been troublesome. Right?
true.
So those are the connections that we need to make as small businesses, to say sometimes you need to invest now to save later.
Yeah, that's so important, guys. I can't emphasize that what Khomotso just said enough. You need to apply preventative measures as an employer in order to make sure that you don't overspend runaway costs later on. Because once you get to court, you don't have an option but to hire an attorney.
Yeah.
Right? So rather hire an attorney beforehand when you need them less.
Yeah.
Than hire them when someone is sitting in front of you.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things that they need to look at.
And it's like your taxes.
Yeah.
All of us could say, I don't need an accountant. I'm sure I can figure this out.
Yeah.
Hey, Kanti Saras is about to knock.
Yeah.
In a year's time, now you owe all this money when you could have paid a monthly retainer to an accounting consultancy to assist you every month.
And get you out of trouble.
Exactly.
Sure. I hope you're listening, guys. This is really important stuff. I love SMME, so this is why we're doing it. I think it's good legal education and it's information that is practical and can be used. Should employers have an emergency fund or some sort of insurance for any labor-related disputes to avoid, being out of pocket at the time when they actually need to pay, large sums of money? What role would an insurance play in this space?
I think it would be useful.
Yeah.
Look, to keep the money, even if it's not a formal insurance policy, to keep the money aside, to keep, some funds ring fenced for dealing with these kinds of disputes. But even better, use that ring fence money to prevent the disputes.
Correct.
Use the ring fence money to prevent the disputes. There's ways of preventing disputes. Oftentimes, when I was a CCMA commissioner, you'd find that employees would come there and they don't even have a real dispute. They're on friendly terms with their former HR manager, their
Right.
former boss. You get them in the room, people are relaxed. There's no issues between them. This guy says, "No, the problem is you guys paid me my leave day short. That's all I'm
Yeah.
here for." You know, and it's not a big
You
fight.
could have talked about that.
Yes, but I mean, I think the more important thing is the nature of the engagement. It demonstrates that the employee, to a large extent, trusts this employer.
Okay.
Even if they were dismissed,
Yeah.
they know that if this person dismissed me, it's me.
Yeah.
I did something that
They
I
had a
shouldn't have
point.
done, you know? And that building of trust while there's still a relationship between parties, while you're still in the employment space, that's what you need to strive towards.
Okay.
Because then even your disciplinary processes, this employee says, I don't have any reason to mistrust this employer. I don't want to be going through this process. But I'm pretty sure that if I'm honest with myself, I'm the one who's in the wrong here. Such employees sometimes don't even go to the CCMA.
That's true.
They leave. They just say, you know what, this is on me. I have to take responsibility for
I
my
concede.
actions.
I'm out.
But if an employee believes that an employer is dishonest
Yeah.
and they cannot trust them, they have all kinds of questions in their minds whilst they're employed to say, this guy is overtaxing me. Hey, did this guy even pay my UIF? Hey, this guy's always lying because I didn't do X, Y, and Z. If they have that nature of that kind of a relationship, you will find disputes not only going to the CCMA, but also going to the labor court and the labor appeal court.
I want to show him.
I want to show him they're going to know me.
Oh.
So that's the challenge that you have where there's mistrust.
Yeah.
Trust is very important in an employment relationship, both ways.
Both ways, indeed. Okay. And what sort of documents do employers need to have in place to comply with labor laws? And we've already talked about policies being really, really important in this space. But in terms of paperwork, administration, what do I need to have as an SMME employer in my space to make sure that I am covered, so to speak?
Good employment contracts
Yes.
go a long, long way.
They do. Not something you found on the net.
No, or no contract at all.
Or no, or a verbal contract.
No contract at all. I mean, which is usually the reality for the small and medium enterprises,
Yeah.
for domestic spaces. I mean, most of the time people don't have contracts of employment, and then they have no way of enforcing rights on either side.
True.
Of course, a contract of employment exists, whether it's written down or it's not.
Yes.
Right? If we perform in terms of some contract, some arrangement, you come to work on these days every week, I pay you this amount of money every month, we've got a contract,
Yep.
clearly.
Yep.
But all the little details in between about complying with rules and regulations and processes around performance, all of those things that could be intertwined into an employment contract, those things are very, very important to crystallize between an
Right.
employer and an employee. Also, there's obviously compliance issues around things like UIF. I always hear horror stories about employers not paying UIF. Somebody goes to the UIF to claim after they've been dismissed and they find there's nothing.
You're not there.
They're not there at all. This employer either hasn't registered them or they haven't been contributing at all to the fund. So those kinds of things happen a lot, and then you get slammed with a big bill from UIF to say you need to pay all of this now. So those kinds of compliance questions are important. And again, this is why it's so important to get good, solid advice as you start in your business.
A written contract is so
Just a
important.
written contract.
Just get it in writing, and then we won't have any backwards and forwards about what is or is not in agreement. That's really, really important. How can employers deal with the problematic employees internally first, right? So it's one employer who has about 5 or 6 employees, right? Does that person also need to go to the nitty-gritty formalities of the policies that you've just been explaining? What internal processes and mechanisms does he need to put in place in order to be able to follow the law in this case?
I'm a big fan of mediation. Mediation as a way of informally dealing with disputes, right? And I think that's usually the best place to start. If you have an employee who's either disgruntled or an employee who's bullying or harassing other employees, sometimes the way to get to the bottom of it is to bring someone in and assist with a sort of impartial mediation process, which is not a disciplinary process.
Yeah.
Which does not end up in disciplinary sanction necessarily.
Correct.
It's just engaging this employee to say, what's going on?
Yeah.
What's really the matter? You might find that this person is struggling with some kind of health issue, or their family member is struggling with some kind of health issue. They're deeply stressed. They have anxiety. They have depression. They are struggling financially. And there's interventions that as a caring employer, you can start to put in place.
Right.
To say, look, let me assist you to get an advisor from the bank. Maybe somebody from the bank can come and talk to you guys about financial discipline, how to manage your money, how to budget, you know. Maybe somebody from SARS can come in to assist you in relation to your taxes. How do you file your returns? What do you do? Because now you're stressed out about these things. Maybe somebody can assist you from a mental health perspective. Let me see who I can find to assist. And I mean, you might think that those things are always costly from the employer perspective, but it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
I mean, getting somebody in from your bank sometimes doesn't cost anything.
Yeah.
Getting somebody from SADAG, from the Depression and Anxiety Group, to come in and talk to your employees will often not cost you anything. So sometimes you can tap into services that are free. There are institutions available to you who are prepared to come into your workspace and help you support your employees. So oftentimes I think employers miss those possibilities, that there's all kinds of avenues that they can tap into to try and better support their employees before there becomes a serious problem. Vital
information. So we're at the mediation stage. So we've finished mediation. What is the next level of intervention that the employer can do? Is it a grievance now, formal grievance?
So it would depend on what's going on, right? Yeah. So if a person is just troublesome and maybe they are, I don't know, coming to work late every day, or they seem to be off sick a lot of the time, and you have an informal engagement with them and things still don't change. Of course, that is when you would then move into more formal processes around discipline, around performance. If the issue maybe started with a grievance coming from other employees, colleagues of this individual, then you might have to go into a next layer, depending on what your policy says. Most employment policies have grievance layers, disciplinary layers. So you would start with an informal process, whether it's a mediation, a conversation, what they call sometimes a counseling session. Those are the informal processes that would kick off. Yeah. But if they are not effective, then you would move into more formal processes.
Okay. And then we've talked about friendly employers, where there's a friendly relationship between an employer and employee. In that situation where maybe the employer is not comfortable to have to run these processes, right? Is there opportunity for him then to find somebody who's more neutral to come in internally into the business and run this process separately?
I mean, apart from lawyers, I mean, as much as I'd love to give my colleagues work, you know, apart from lawyers, there's psychologists who can come in and run these processes. You know, it's not only the legal profession that deals with this kind of situation. And I would encourage employers to seek neutral advice and neutral services, because it also creates a situation where you've dealt with the process in a way that is free of bias.
Right.
So you've also demonstrated to your employees, I do not want to control this process. You know, I actually want to bring in somebody who has no interest here, who has no real interest. Side. Let them decide, let them take it forward, because they're also the experts. Maybe I'm just shop owner. Yeah. You know, maybe that's what I do. I don't know anything about this stuff. So I would encourage employers to actually seek professional advice in this respect.
Okay. I think that's really, really important space that employers need to look at, that they often lack in. And in that lack, you actually then suffer the consequences at a later stage. So employers, I hope you're listening very well. Another question that I want to ask is, how can employers create a more harmonious working environment that avoids disputes, that avoids, disunification within the team, within the business? What can employers then do to create that working environment?
Well, it's not Pizza Friday, I can assure you.
No, it's not Pizza Friday.
People always think it's Pizza Friday. That's going to solve all the problems.
Not Pizza Friday.
It's not. Pizza's awesome, but it's not going to solve your problems. So I think what's really, really important is going back to trust. Create relationships of trust. How do you create relationships of trust? Fair, equal practices amongst your employees.
Okay.
Where people start to see that there's a difference between me and her. That is where discord begins.
It does.
To say, this lady came in late 5 times. The whole week she was late. And this guy didn't say anything.
Yeah.
I'm late one time.
I get a warning.
And I have a warning. And he's breathing down my neck. This lady is able to work and do how she does her work on her own, decide how she works every single day. I'm being micromanaged.
He's here.
He's all on top of me. He's on top of me when I'm not in the office. He's calling all the time. Even though I actually perform my work, he wants to check what am I doing with every second of my day?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The moment I start to see that I'm different from another employee, I'm being treated differently. Forget about pay. I mean,
Yeah.
pay is another conversation altogether.
Altogether.
But the day-to-day treatment of your employees, if there's any discrepancy between those situations, how I'm being treated versus how my colleagues are being treated, you start to create mistrust.
That's true.
If I get to hear from a former employee how you mistreated them, now that they've left the business, how you mistreated them, what did you say to them, how did you abuse them, you've created mistrust.
That's true.
If we have a discord between sanctions, you and I both commit the same offense, you are dismissed, I get to stay.
That is a lot.
All you've created is mistrust
Correct.
amongst your workforce.
Because you're discriminating from one person to another.
Some are better than others.
Some are better
You
than
listen to her grievance, you don't listen to my grievance.
Yeah.
Some are better than others. So as soon as, and those are the kind of small issues that creep into small businesses,
Yeah.
because there's only one layer of management in many cases. It's you as the employer, the director of the business, and maybe you've got 3-4 members of staff,
Yeah.
but you start to treat them differently. So you need to also, and I mean, look, employers are also people, right?
Yes, they are
We're also
people.
humans. So you also need to be honest with yourself and reflect, why am I treating them differently?
Yes.
What's going on with me
Yeah.
that makes me see them in a different way?
That's true.
Does this one perhaps genuinely have a performance issue that I feel like I have to manage a little bit? Let me deal with it honestly.
Yes.
Let me engage them honestly and say, this is my problem with the nature of how you perform in your work, and I want you to work on it. Rather than create this secret layer of oversight
Correct.
that they don't understand and
Where
that
it's
you haven't
coming from.
explained. Exactly.
Oh, sure. That was really insightful. I think it was really, really important for us to unpack this as Mamolao so that we can be able to get the right level of engagement between employers and employees. Thank you so much for joining us, Khomotso. This has really been insightful. Guys, I really hope you've learned a lot. Please make sure that you take this level of information and implement it into your businesses, right? If your employer, perhaps you find yourself in the examples that we've given, perhaps share this video with your employer so that they can also be enlightened about this level of information, right? It's free. It's on the internet. It's on YouTube at The Real Mamolao. It's on Instagram and TikTok at The Real Mamolao. I think it's really, really important for all of us as employers and employees to be able to manage the process so well that we have businesses growing and not businesses closing. So that is all we have from Mamolao today. I really hope you've learned a lot. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share at The Real Mamolao. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.